Hello, it's Autumn, and this is Old Testament Survey, the last final for this year. Super excited. Everything's been super great. And so the first thing I want to go over is how to read Psalms and other biblical poems. Obviously, this was one of the things that was going to be in my presentation. If you watched any of my other videos, I speak about poetry a little bit too much, and I love it so much. So biblical poetry doesn't rhyme, it doesn't have meter, so many times it can be hard to read. I think that's the first problem people have is, oh, I don't like poetry, oh, it's boring, oh, it's this or that. And I think that in the Bible specifically, it's harder to read it because it doesn't rhyme and it doesn't have any type of meter. It doesn't have like a da 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 da. I think that what it does have though, and what poetry does have in our, I don't want to say secular world, but poetry in our modern world, whatever that may be, poetry that you would think of in your head immediately when you think of the word poetry, is a lot different from biblical poetry, but it also does have something similar that comes together, and that's parallelism. And that's when one line of poetry has direct relationship with another line. So if something is saying something in one line and then you kind of read it again and it goes with that line, that is parallelism. And so when those things happen, that's the author telling you to pay attention to that line. Why is it repetitive? What's the deeper meaning? Read it over and over again so you can really be like, why did they say this over and over and over again? And a lot of times that happens in Psalms, whether that's lament, whether that's praise, whether that's thanksgiving, whatever it is, if it's spoke about over and over and over again, there probably is some good meaning to that, and you should probably pay attention to those things and write it down. Second thing I want to talk about is Israel and the Holy Land. It is the promised land, the descendants of Moses. I think that's what is kind of misconstrued, is Moses actually never got to the promised land. Moses was actually long gone before that, but and that's from striking the rock and not obeying Jesus, and Jesus or not Jesus, God, and God being like, you will not make it to the promised land now because you have not obeyed me. And so, but all of his descendants did get to the promised land, and that was still the promise they had for Moses. We get too obsessed over the land as a sightseeing place and forget that God's first interest was the people. The land was just a means to an end. I think that is always God's intention, is he doesn't care about a land itself or a destination, but he cares most about the people walking into it. So even though Moses disobeyed him, he still allowed all of his descendants, as he promised before, that he will be going in. And so that just shows that Jesus does follow his promises. And so I just got a quote from the little passage in there. It says, there are many reasons for waiting or wanting to visit the Holy Land. While there are many marvelous sights to visit in Israel, you will not see the earthly remains of Christ, for as the angel told Mary Magdalene at his tomb, he is not there, for he is risen. I don't think a lot of people are like, oh, I want to go see the tomb, I want to do this. They think that that's the tomb. We don't really know for sure. Obviously, people now aren't living back then, so we have no idea if that's true or not. But also, Jesus isn't there anymore. Like, yes, the Holy Land is a beautiful place. Right now, it's going through a lot, and things are happening. But also, Jesus isn't there anymore. He has risen. Sins are forgiven. Like, that part is done. And so I just have a little map of the Holy Land if you did want to take a look at that. Again, I will put the links in my submission if it lets me. But yeah, and so that whole passage from Mary Magdalene in the tomb, that comes from Matthew 28:6 if you wanted to know. And so the last thing I want to talk about is why we should read the why should we read the Old Testament? Number one, because Jesus did. Like that is the one thing. If nothing else, if you listen to nothing else, like Jesus read the Old Testament. He quoted scripture frequently. Two of them, obviously, one when he was tempted by Satan. He told Satan, like, this is what I know. You don't have authority over me to say this. You should not tempt me, da da da. And also the Sermon on the Mount. He didn't just grab those things from thin air, which he could have, because he's God's literal son, literal descendant from Jesus or from God. So he totally could have, but he also gotten those things just as we do when we write sermons. We get them from scripture. And so Jesus literally got scripture and he read it from the Old Testament. Number 2, the disciples quoted the Hebrew Bible. And number 3, Paul knew the Hebrew Bible. Once you read the Old Testament, you will be able to understand Paul's doctrine in full. Many people in the Bible have read the Old Testament, and I think that it's hard to understand sometimes. There's a lot of names and a lot of this person's son and this person's son, and it gets a little misconstrued a little bit, and sometimes you have to okay, I get it, but this. And sometimes those names are super important as well, so definitely pay attention to those. But I think that the Old Testament and just the Bible in itself has so many deeper things to look at. It has so many sermons in just one passage, and you should really just read it, study it, do what you can to gain all of those things, because it was written and it was words given by God himself. So thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.